The morning light came through the kitchen window the same way it always does, slow and golden, spreading across the oak floors I refinished myself 3 summers ago. I was on my second cup of coffee, watching a pair of cardinals fight over the feeder in the backyard, when my phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't recognize the number at first. Then I did. I let it ring. It rang again 20 minutes later. Then a third time, just before noon. By the fourth call, I picked up, not because I'd softened, but because I'd been waiting for this moment for nearly 3 years, and I was ready. Dad. Her voice had that careful quality to it, the one she used when she wanted something and knew she'd have to work for it. "I've been trying to reach you." "I know," I said. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing, recalibrating. "Can we talk? I mean really talk. There are things I should have said a long time ago." I told her I was listening. And I was, though not the way she thought. "My name is Howard. I'm 63 years old. I live in a 4-bedroom craftsman house in Asheville, North Carolina, with a wraparound porch and a view of the Blue Ridge Mountains that still takes my breath away on clear mornings. I have a workshop in the garage where I build furniture. Not for money, though I could sell every piece if I wanted to. I do it because it keeps my hands busy and my mind quiet. 3 years ago, I was sleeping in the back office of a buddy's auto repair shop in Knoxville, Tennessee, with $14 in my wallet and no plan beyond getting through the next day. Here's how that happened. My wife Sandra and I raised 2 kids in a brick colonial in Farragut, just outside Knoxville. She passed from ovarian cancer in the spring of 2017, and I won't pretend that loss didn't hollow me out in ways I'm still finding. We'd been married 31 years. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday and kept a running list of good things that happened each week in a little spiral notebook on the nightstand. After she died, I found those notebooks in a shoebox. There were 11 of them. Our son Nathan lives out in Portland. He called me every Sunday for the first year after Sandra died, and still calls most weeks. He's a quiet man, steady, the kind of person who shows up when things go wrong without making a production of it. Our daughter Lee was a different story. Lee had always been sharp and restless in the way some people are, the kind of energy that can go either toward ambition or toward taking shortcuts, depending on which path opens up first. She married a man named Troy about 6 years ago. Troy worked in commercial real estate and had the smile of someone who'd practiced it. I didn't dislike him immediately. That came later. About a year after Sandra passed, Lee called me. She and Troy had found a property, a duplex in a developing part of Knoxville. Good bones, great location, and the seller was motivated. The numbers made sense, she said. It was the kind of investment that would set up their future. But they were $40,000 short on the down payment. I was 60 at the time. I'd retired from 30 years in facilities management for a hospital system. I had a pension, modest savings, and the house in Farragut paid off. Sandra had been gone 14 months. I was rattling around in 5 bedrooms alone, still finding her handwriting on grocery lists tucked into kitchen drawers. I gave them the $40,000. I didn't ask for paperwork. She was my daughter. 6 months later, Lee called again. They'd found the second property. A small commercial space, even better opportunity, but they needed a co-signer on the loan and a cash injection of another $28,000 to cover the renovation costs. The bank required it. I co-signed. I wrote the check. 3 months after that, Lee suggested I sell the house in Farragut and move in with them. They had the space, she said. It didn't make sense for me to be alone and paying property taxes on a house that big. I'd been lonely. Anyone could see that. And I was. So I sold the house. Cleared $210,000 after everything. I put $180,000 into a shared account that Lee set up for household expenses and investments. I kept $30,000 in my own account for personal needs. I moved into their spare bedroom. For about 8 months it was fine. Not warm exactly, but functional. Troy was mostly absent. Always a deal in the works, always a dinner meeting. Lee worked from home and kept the house in a kind of controlled order. I helped with yard work and groceries and tried to stay out of their way. Then the dynamic shifted. It happened gradually, the way these things do. Small corrections, small exclusions, a quiet rearrangement of what I was and wasn't included in. My input on the investment properties stopped being welcomed. Decisions got made, and I'd hear about them afterward. My room, I noticed, was being referred to as the guest room when Lee spoke to friends on the phone. One evening in March, Lee sat me down at the kitchen table. Troy was there too, which told me this was rehearsed. She said it wasn't working. They needed the space. Troy's mother was going to be moving in and the room would be needed. She had printed out a list of assisted living facilities in the area, which she slid across the table to me. I was 61 years old. I did not need assisted living. I asked about the $180,000. Lee said it had been invested in the properties. It wasn't a loan, she explained. It was a contribution. Didn't I want to be part of building something for the family? Hadn't that been the understanding? It had not been my understanding. She handed me an envelope. Inside was $10 and a piece of paper with the number for a rideshare app. I stared at that envelope for a long time. Then I picked up my 2 bags. I hadn't brought much when I moved in, and I called my friend Pete, who owns a shop on Clinton Highway. He let me sleep on a cot in his back office for 3 weeks and never once made me feel embarrassed about it. I was 61 years old and I had 14 to my name, and my daughter had handed me a rideshare number like I was a package to be dispatched. I want you to understand something about that moment. I didn't fall apart. I didn't beg. I was humiliated, yes, deeply and completely. But somewhere underneath the humiliation there was something else, something quiet and patient that said, not yet. But eventually. Pete's shop had Wi-Fi. I started there. I'd spent 30 years managing facilities for a large hospital system, budgets, contractors, compliance, vendor contracts worth millions of dollars. I knew how to read a balance sheet. I knew how to manage complex projects and keep things running when everything was trying to break down. I just never applied those skills to myself. With 14 and a cot, I applied them to myself. The first thing I did was call a lawyer, a real one, not a friend of a friend. I found an elder law attorney in Knoxville named Patricia, and I made an appointment for a consultation. I used $10 of what I had left to take the bus across town. I told her everything. She didn't look surprised. She'd heard variations of this story before, she said. What I needed, she explained, was documentation. The $40,000 gift, the $28,000 check, the $180,000 transferred into the shared account, any records I had, bank statements, texts, emails, anything in writing. I had some of it, not all of it. But I'm an organized man by profession, and I'd kept more than Lee probably assumed. Patricia filed a civil action. It took time. These things always do. In the meantime, I needed to live. Pete paid me under the table to help with the shop. Light labor, bookkeeping, answering phones. It wasn't much, but it was enough to rent a room in a boarding house on the east side of Knoxville, $115 a week, shared bathroom, window that didn't quite close all the way. I fixed the window myself. The landlord deducted it from my rent. I started picking up handyman jobs on the side. I'm good with my hands, always have been. I could wire an outlet, patch drywall, repair a deck. Word spread in the neighborhood. I wasn't getting rich, but I was moving. About 4 months in, I got a call from a property management company in East Tennessee. They'd found my name through a facilities management network. They needed a consultant, someone to assess their maintenance operations and tighten up their vendor contracts. 6-week engagement, $85 an hour. I bought a decent shirt and took the meeting. That contract led to 3 more. By month 8, I had incorporated a small consulting LLC. By month 14, I was billing $12,000 a month. I moved out of the boarding house and into a 1-bedroom apartment in West Knoxville. Nothing fancy, but mine. I bought a used truck. I started sleeping through the night again. What I didn't do during any of this time was contact Lee. I let Patricia do her work, and Patricia was thorough. Here is what Patricia found, piece by piece, over 18 months of civil discovery. The $40,000 I'd given them for the duplex. The duplex had been purchased entirely with a bank loan. Lee and Troy had pocketed my money. There was no equity stake in my name, no documentation of any kind that I'd contributed. The $28,000 for renovations, the commercial property renovation had been funded through a small business loan. My $28,000 had gone directly into a joint account that Lee had subsequently transferred to a personal account in her name alone. The $180,000 from the house sale? Lee had moved it, in 3 separate transfers over 4 months, into an LLC she and Troy had formed without my knowledge. The LLC owned a short-term rental property in the Smoky Mountains that they were operating on Airbnb. Total, $248,000 of my money systematically moved and concealed. Here is the part that still makes me go quiet when I think about it. The co-signature on the commercial loan. Because I'd co-signed, I was technically liable if they'd a T. And they had in fact been delinquent on 2 payments. My credit had taken damage I hadn't even been aware of. Patricia brought in a forensic accountant. The forensic accountant's report was 41 pages long. I read all 41 pages, twice. By the time Lee called me on that quiet Tuesday morning, I was living in Asheville. I'd sold the consulting business 14 months earlier to a regional property management firm for enough money to buy the Craftsman house outright, put a significant sum in retirement accounts, and still have working capital left over. I was comfortable in a way I hadn't been in years, not because of the money, though the money mattered, but because everything around me was mine. I'd built it from $14 in a cot. Nobody had helped me get here and nobody could take it. The civil case had concluded 3 months prior. The judgment against Lee and Troy was $248,000 in compensatory damages plus interest. Their attorney had tried twice to settle. Patricia had declined both offers on my instruction. Troy's commercial real estate business had been subpoenaed. Several of his other clients had started asking questions. The short-term rental LLC had been dissolved by court order. The Smoky Mountain property placed in a receivership to satisfy the judgment. Lee knew all of this. She'd known for months, which is why, when she called, her voice had that careful, calibrated quality. There are things I should have said a long time ago, she told me. I'm listening, I said. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't fully understood the harm she'd caused. She said Troy had been the one pushing the financial decisions and she'd gone along with things she should have questioned. She said she'd been going to therapy and was trying to understand why she'd made the choices she had. I listened to all of it. Then she said that she and Troy had separated, that things had gotten difficult, that she was staying with a friend and the friend's situation was temporary, and she was wondering, just wondering, if there might be any possibility of coming to stay with me for a while, just to get back on her feet. She knew it was a lot to ask. I took a breath. I looked out at the mountains. I know it's a lot to ask, I agreed. There was a hope in her silence. I recognized it. I'd once had it too, when I'd believed that the people you loved would not let you fall. I'm not able to do that, I said. Dad, let me finish. I kept my voice even. I'd practiced being even. I spent 3 years building back something that took me a lifetime to accumulate. I did that alone, in a back office and a boarding house and a 1-bedroom apartment, because you handed me $10 and a phone number and showed me to the door. I'm not angry about it anymore, but I don't have anything in this house for you. She started to say something about how she had nowhere to go. There are resources, I said. Shelters, assistance programs, transitional housing. I can send you some information if you'd like. I paused. Or I could put $10 in an envelope and a number for a rideshare app, whichever is more helpful. The line went quiet. I wish you well, Lee. I genuinely do. I meant it. But this is my house, I built it, and you are not welcome in it. I ended the call. I stood at the kitchen window for a long time after, watching those cardinals at the feeder. One of them, the male, red as a stoplight, landed on the rim and looked directly at the window, the way birds sometimes seem to do. Sandra would have said he was checking in. She believed things like that. I smiled at him, refilled my coffee. The civil judgment still stands. Lee and Troy's attorney filed the motion to reduce the damages award last fall. The court denied it. My attorney says collection will take time. It usually does. But the judgment accrues interest at 7.5% annually under Tennessee law, so time is not on their side. Nathan came to visit in October. We spent 4 days fishing on the French Broad River, and I taught him how to do a mortise and tenon joint in the workshop. He asked me once carefully how I was doing with everything. I told him the truth. I was doing better than I'd been in years. He nodded and didn't push further. That's Nathan. I teach a woodworking class on Saturday mornings at a community center in Weaverville. 6 students, mostly retirees. Nobody under 55. I don't charge much. One woman in the class, a widow from Brevard named Elaine, makes the best peach preserves I've ever tasted. She brought a jar last weekend and left it on my workbench without comment. I ate half of it that night with a spoon, standing at the kitchen counter looking out at the dark mountains. There are things I'd do differently. I'd have gotten paperwork on every dollar I gave. I'd have trusted less and verified more. I'd have kept my own house and my own space, no matter how lonely the rooms felt, because loneliness is survivable and betrayal costs more to recover from than any property tax. But I don't spend much time looking backward. The cardinals come every morning. The light comes through the kitchen window slow and golden. I've got coffee and mountains and oak floors. I refinished myself, and a workshop full of sawdust and half-finished chairs and a jar of peach preserves and enough silence in this house that I can hear myself think. Nobody handed me any of this. That's the part they didn't count on. That $10 would be enough to start. I still think about that kitchen table sometimes. The way Lee slid that printed list across to me. Assisted living facilities, neat little columns, like she'd done her research, like she'd been thoughtful about it, and that envelope with $10 inside. The strange, practiced calm on her face. I've asked myself what went wrong, and I don't think there's one clean answer. What I've landed on is this: the consequences of our choices don't announce themselves. They accumulate quietly, the way water finds its way through a foundation, slowly, invisibly, until one day the floor shifts. Leigh made choices over several years, each one a small step further from the kind of person she might have been. And when the floor finally shifted, she was standing on the wrong side of it. What carried me through wasn't luck or timing, though both played a role. What carried me through was three things that I didn't fully understand. I possessed until I had nothing else left to rely on. The first was knowing the difference between right and wrong, and refusing to blur it even when I was hurting. I could have gone to her door angry. I could have made threats I didn't have the resources to back up. Instead, I got on a bus with $10 and sat across from an attorney and told the truth as plainly as I could. That choice, to stay honest, to stay within the law, to refuse to become something lesser just because someone had treated me as lesser. That was the foundation everything else was built on. You can't build anything real on a crooked foundation. The second was thinking clearly about what I actually knew and what I could actually do. I'm a facilities manager by trade. I know how to assess a broken system and fix it piece by piece. I applied that same discipline to my own situation. I didn't spiral. I didn't make emotional decisions. I took stock of what I had, some documents, some skills, 30 years of professional knowledge, and I built from there. Clarity is a tool. Most people don't treat it that way. The third was simply refusing to stop. There were mornings in that boarding house when the window didn't close right and the cold came through, and I was 61 years old, sleeping on a narrow bed with 40 to my name, and I could have decided that the story was over. A lot of people would have. Instead, I fixed the window, deducted it from my rent, and got back to work. That stubbornness, that refusal to accept the ending someone else had written for me, turned out to be worth more than the $248,000 they took. Lee called looking for shelter. What she didn't understand is that the shelter she needed wasn't a room in my house. It was the kind of shelter you can only build inside yourself, from the ground up, when there's nothing else left to lean on. I hope she finds a way to that. I genuinely do, but I built this house, and some doors stay closed.